Kia ora, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen Aid, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight on a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers, he is a lifelong member of the Council of Socialist Ents, the last great liberal lion of the left, blogger, author and folk singer, the irresistible force of Chris Trotter. And he is one of our most distinguished journalists, investigative reporters covering disasters and wars far from New Zealand's shores. His article this year in Metro detailed the handing over of civilians to known torture units by New Zealand SAS in Afghanistan. For that, he's had his credibility attacked by John Key, which would suggest he's doing his job. Welcome to the show, John Stevenson. Coming up tonight, issue 1. Does the $4 billion Christchurch quake blowout damage the economy? Bernard Hickey predicts a black budget in 2012. Is this the beginning argument for privatising all the assets? Issue 2. Labour Party leadership coup rumours. Is it media speculation that lets the government off the hook? Issue 3 tonight. 10 years this month since September 11 sparked the war on terror. Who has won, and does it justify occupying Afghanistan, especially in light of explosive new revelations by Nikki Hager that the base is a CIA headquarters? And we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off with issue 1. So Treasury got the cost of the quake out by $4 billion. Forget psychic octopuses, a tarot card reading jellyfish would have better rates of prediction than officials in Wellington. Christchurch is more damage than we calculated. What does our second largest city being out of action for longer mean for the rest of the country? Chris, Bill English's voice cracked during the press conference. Would he have been screaming at Treasury officials all day? What does this mean for how Bill balances the books?
Well, it would have been very bad news for him, obviously. It's very bad news for the country. I think probably the person who's put his finger on the true cost is Peter Townsend from the Chamber of Commerce in Christchurch. He puts the figure at around 30 billion, so we've got a lot of bad news to come.
Right.
I mean, I think the person who responded most acutely to this was actually Russell Norman.
Yep. Yes.
Who made a very cogent comment, I thought, on the television news, when he said, in just the right tone too, he said, I think, Bill's responded poorly to this. We can't just go on whacking this on the credit card. We have to start generating some more money to pay for this. And of course the Greens have been advocating a levy from the very beginning.
That's right.
They're really starting to look as though they have called this one correctly from the word go. And I notice too that while English was unwilling to talk about income tax, he didn't rule out some sort of special tax, which is what a levy is, really.
Well, exactly. John, I mean, Bernard Hickey says the blowout means we should expect a black budget next year on 2013, plus an increase in reinsurance costs. Is National foolish to have ruled out the levy the Greens are pushing for?
Well, you're talking to someone that's always had difficulty balancing his own checkbook. But for what it's worth, I think Bernard Hickey's right. Yeah. He's a very smart, savvy operator. I think, as Chris said, the Greens have called this one early. They've called it right. National was very good at harnessing the public momentum after the quake and in saying the right things. But I think they really lacked a sense of leadership and pulling New Zealanders together and dealing with the aftermath of the quake as a national issue. Right. Most New Zealanders have a tremendous amount of empathy, even though they haven't been through it. I mean, I met someone the other day who'd been through the quake, and I was just staggered at what they told me. And I think most New Zealanders, even though no one wants to pay more tax or more levies, would have welcomed an opportunity to participate and have a bit of money taken out of their salary, their income, to help the people of Christchurch get back on their feet. I mean, this is a national tragedy. Yeah.
Chris, help me out here. When we were borrowing $16 billion, it was the end of Western civilization as we know it. Now that's been raised to $18 billion, and Bill English is comfortable. How comfortable is it?
Well, a sovereign state, has resources that a city and certainly that private sector companies lack. But, even a sovereign state, particularly if it's a relatively small one like New Zealand, is going to struggle with a disaster of this magnitude. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have a column in the Christchurch Press, and when this happened, particularly the second murderous jolt in February, I mean, I was very, very seized then of the urgency of making New Zealand understand that this was the moral equivalent of war.
Right.
And we needed to respond in that way. We needed to draw the whole country into the business of rebuilding. We needed every New Zealander to feel that they were contributing in a real way, which meant the levy that the Greens were on about. We should have been, you know, for the last year, we should have been having our TV programs interrupted by advertisements for earthquake bonds, you know, buy till it hurts, in the same way that people were encouraged to buy war bonds during World War II. That's the sort of approach that was needed, and it's interesting that even people on the right, like Fran O'Sullivan, are now saying, look, this requires more leadership.
That's right.
This is not something that you can just leave to the market. The Herald this week,
God forbid.
Once again, making the point that you can't let the market adjudicate something like this. The market, like everything else, has been shaken up in Christchurch, and intervention is what's required.
John, beyond the numbers, people in Christchurch are hurting. You've seen firsthand the impacts of natural disasters overseas. How do you think New Zealand's responding?
Well, I think New Zealanders certainly feel empathy for the people down there, but I don't think we really can understand, and I don't think anyone who hasn't been through an earthquake or a tsunami or a war can really understand the amount of trauma that involves. I mean, as I said, I was fortunate to meet one of the senior editorial people from the Christchurch Press not long ago, and he told us, you know, stories about what had happened and the way they'd covered it, and just the challenges that they'd had to deal with, and it was, you know, deeply moving, and you're dealing with some profoundly shaken and in some cases profoundly traumatised people. I don't think quarantining the problem, as the government seems to have done, is going to work. As Chris is right, you know, you need this to be treated as a national issue. You need a lot more leadership on the issue, and I think, ironically, some of the best leadership has come from the media. Campbell Live, for example, going down there, giving people a voice.
John's been amazing, eh?
He's done some fantastic work, and I think you know, that's been a very clear wake-up call to the government that they need to start dealing with this far more seriously.
Question both of you. The budget placed all its hopes for growth in the Christchurch rebuild and Rugby World Cup. Neither look like they're going to be living up to Treasury's hopes. What are the wider ramifications for the country?
Well, obviously, if these two events don't generate the projected income, our deficit, you know, will remain higher than we are comfortable with. And once again, I don't think the National Party in its second term, and we're assuming that it's going to have a second term, is going to be able to avoid looking at the fiscal side. I mean, you can't just go on cutting and cutting. And if the regeneration of Christchurch is to provide the sort of boost to the economy that's needed, well, the government is going to have to get much more involved. And I think if you listen to people like the head of the Chamber of Commerce down in Christchurch, who's a solid, sensible sort of bloke, I mean, no lefty, but, you know, I think he has understood from the beginning that just leaving it to the insurance companies and hoping that EQC is going to have enough in the kitty just ain't going to do it.
If the economy does dive, is this where we start seeing the argument, look, we have to sell the other 51% of the assets? I mean, when do we get that kick?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I think, you know, you're right, it's on the cards.
Question, finally, who wins, who loses by underestimating how damaged Christchurch is? No winners?
Oh, no, I think...
Politically expedient?
I think catastrophes like this are very hard to politicise, actually, because people get very short-tempered with politicians. So we're all the losers. There's no winners here.
No winners,
no winners at all. Certainly not certainly amongst the people of Christchurch.
Certainly not. Thank you, panel. Moving on to issue 2. The New Zealand news cycle seems to be Phil Goff leadership coup, John Key at 95% popularity in the polls, live updates of Happy Feet, and back to Phil Goff leadership crisis. Chris, is the media attention manufactured on purpose now with any rumour from Slater, Farrar or Hooton enough to stage more leadership speculation? Are Labour going to roll Phil before the election?
I would be very surprised if they did. There's no doubt that Labour is degenerating into an ugly political ruck. who's going to emerge with the ball is anybody's guess. Some say David Cunliffe, some say Shane Jones, some say David Parker, some say Andrew Little. The plethora of potential candidates is an indication of the problem in many respects. I don't think it's some sort of deliberate plan on the part of the news media. Research International's figures for Labour, which came out this week, are just disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. And what happens is there's a phenomenon that the political scientists refer to as the spiral of silence.
Liberation blog.
Yes, Bryce Edwards, being a political scientist, is well aware of this. And my old friend Wayne Hope from AUT, he gave me a great pile of reading on the matter. And it's quite clear that New Zealand is now entering into this phenomena. As more and more people become aware of how popular the government is, fewer and fewer people are willing to say that they're supporting the Labour Party or Labour opposition. And it's quite clear. Keith Ning has broken down the Research International figures into helpful little graphs, and it's just mind-boggling. I mean, among the people most likely to vote, National support isn't sitting in the 50s, it's sitting in the 60s. Only people aged 18 to 35 seem willing to give the centre-left a go, which is vaguely encouraging. And very interesting, I was discussing this with Paul Henry, of all people, on Radio Live.
God forbid.
God forbid.
God forbid.
And, you know, he was saying, is it really Gough, you know, and his flipping and flopping on neoliberalism that's doing this? And the point I made to him, and I'll remake for you, is that 18 to 35 age group that has no real memory of Rogernomics is actually the age group most disposed towards Labour and the Greens. So it really does seem to me that those of us who can remember Phil being Roger Douglas's little helper, you know, find it very difficult to see him as the leader of a left-wing charge.
John, Brian Edwards is highly critical on his blog this week about the veracity of the opinion polls, and Brian Gould questioned the fawning over John Key by the media in his column in the Herald. When does the media stop reflecting opinion and start manipulating public opinion?
Well, I think Chris is right. I don't think that there's a conspiracy, if you like, out there, but after some stage it becomes sort of self-perpetuating, and I mean you have to feel sorry for Phil Gough, don't you? I mean, likeable guy. He was a very competent foreign minister, defence minister, but he just hasn't been able to make the step up. He just doesn't seem to be able to galvanise the public. And what's really tragic about all this is that New Zealand is in desperate straits. New Zealanders are really suffering out there. People are hungry. People are unemployed. People are really struggling with the cost of living. Kids are going to school without food. We need a healthy opposition. And when you look
there's
at
no credible opposition,
well, not according to the public, not according to the polls.
Yeah.
And this is a disaster for those people who need a voice, who need representation, who need their views and their challenges brought.
Who need the Labour Party, in short.
Who need the Labour Party.
And,
yes.
and I think one of the things which is really turning off more and more people, traditional Labour voters especially, is this spectacle of the people behind Phil, his front bench, all kind of looking anywhere but at Phil and sort of whistling, knowing that Phil is going down and then their chance will come.
Right. And it's not even subtle.
Yeah,
it's not even subtle.
And it's damn all of you, traditional Labour supporters. We don't really care about your situation because we're far too focused on who's going to replace Phil Gough. And that's becoming really obvious to the public.
Yeah, I know. Well, let's get into it. Camp Cunliffe, Camp Parker, Camp Jones. You understand the machinations of the Labour Party power blocks better than most. What are their calculations right now?
Oh, well, the calculation overwhelmingly on the part of all of the contenders is do not under any circumstances take the poison chalice from Phil Gough's hands. Let him drink it down to the last dregs.
Right.
And wait for him to fall over and die on the 26th of November, and then make your move. Now, in a sense, the logical successor to Phil Gough is David Cunliffe. But David Cunliffe, has personal and political difficulties vis-a-vis his family and the caucus in general, which makes him a less than enthusiastic
But the public
Brutus.
like him. The public like
Yes,
that
and
case.
he's very good on television, and he's the obvious successor, as I
And
say.
Parker's too invisible, isn't it?
Parker, I think, could be sold to the New Zealand public, if you excuse that awful word, as the trustworthy family lawyer to come in and clean up the mess.
Yeah.
I think you could do that with some success.
So a nerdy Kevin Rudd.
That's right, New Zealand's Kevin Rudd.
Yeah.
That's the way to explain David Parker. Shane Jones, well, he was on The Nation this week, and
Did he do anyone any favours?
It was clear that he was sending a shot across the bow of the good ship Cunliffe.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
no doubt about that. And I noticed that he had shaved off his beard.
Ah.
Now, these things may sound trivial, but that beard has been a problem for Mr. Jones.
Yeah.
It makes him look vaguely seedy, and
It
given
does.
his
Well,
behaviour in hotel rooms,
indeed.
not something you really want to keep on your face, as
No.
it were. So the fact that he was clean-shaven and shaped up quite well suggests to me that he has plans, if only to prevent the people he doesn't like from becoming
right. Well, that's great, isn't it, John?
Happy little ship, yes.
While the media focus on Phil's latest imaginary coup, is it letting the government off the hook over youth unemployment, increasing poverty, in a far less equitable society?
Yes, of course it is. But I want to come back to something that Chris was saying and I alluded to earlier, and that is the role that the Labour Party members are playing themselves in all this. I mean, it's not just sitting there and watching Phil drink the poison chalice down to the last drop. They're wandering around the room trying on his clothes for size, picking up the baubles of office and thinking, that would sit quite nicely on my shelf. And of course...
They're measuring their offices, right?
And it's deeply cynical and deeply shameful behaviour, and it's also not just ethically wrong, but it's practically very foolish, because they seem to forget that if their party takes a real hit in this election, which Chris and others suggest that it will, if it gets down to 20%, they can be wearing all those clothes, but they're not going to have much of a party to go to.
Sure, that's right. Sure.
So it's counterproductive. It's cynical, and people within the party. I've spoken to MPs within the party who talk about it, and they just shake their heads in despair. I mean, they just,
Well, Claire Curran's outburst of a week or so ago, I think, spoke volumes. I mean, she was, getting all frustrated with the Greens and so forth. But what really came through, I thought, in her postings on Red Alert, was just this enormous frustration and anger and sense of futility about
there are
everything.
many MPs who are angry that they don't feel their front bench are leading,
Exactly, and I thought she did us all a big favour, actually.
Yeah.
What she said didn't make a lot of sense, but the way she said it spoke volumes.
There's still fire there. Who wins, who loses by constant speculation of Phil Goff's leadership? John Key must be laughing.
well, Crosby Texter couldn't write this stuff.
Or, as you're fond of saying, John, you couldn't make this shit up.
That's right.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight. It has been 10 years this month since September 11 sparked America's oxymoronic war on terror. Is perpetual war winning, and does it justify occupying Afghanistan, especially in light of Nikki Hager's explosive details that our camp has apparently been a CIA base all along? Your thoughts?
Well, of course, anyone that's seen the face of war knows that no one benefits, no one wins from war. I mean, all are losers. And certainly New Zealand, we haven't been particularly badly hit by the war of terror. War on terror, we've lost, according to Wayne Mapp and John Key, people in Bali bombings and so on. But we've lost obviously a handful of soldiers. Most recently, tragic death of Doug Grant in Kabul.
That's right.
But people here don't really see the face of what happens in Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, it's been, really words are not enough. Brown University in the United States did a survey this week, talked about the cost in human terms of 225,000 dead. In my view, that's an extremely low estimate. Yep. I believe the numbers are far higher in Iraq alone. I believe that direct costs from the war and the occupation probably exceeds 1 million people. Certainly 4 million people have been made refugees. Yep. 2 million inside Iraq, 2 million outside. 750,000 women in Iraq are widows today as a result of the war. Tragedy beyond any imagination. Is there a dimension to New Zealand's involvement that's equally as damaging, certainly not in human terms, but in the moral cost, yes, I think we've been very damaged by our involvement in the so-called war on terror. And as Nikki Hager's pointed out this week, it's been far more extensive than we've been led to believe.
So our base that we were told was a reconstruction base.
Yes.
Right? Helping, you get this vision of us rebuilding schools and
handing out chocolates and teddy bears.
Exactly, and digging ditches for water. It's actually been all along a CIA base.
Well, that's been part of the function, has been intelligence gathering by the CIA and the National Security Agency of the United States, eavesdropping and so on. And in some ways it's hardly surprising, because New Zealand is a very small cog in a very big military machine, and the Americans call the shots. We don't call the shots. And we've also been involved in a lot of covert operations, including helping in planning attacks on insurgents in Pakistan, something that New Zealanders certainly weren't told about.
So going into Afghanistan? Pakistan?
No, being involved, according to Nikki's book, in intelligence gathering in order to take out insurgents in Pakistan,
so those activists
possibly by drone strikes.
Those activists who attacked the base were actually quite right then?
The ones who take the
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a program. That's a program all in itself. But certainly this will add ammunition to the case. Yeah.
Chris, former World Bank economist Joseph Stiglitz says the war has cost $7 trillion. Is the real lesson here the limits of American hard power?
Well, it's an imperial war, and I think it's important for New Zealanders to understand that we are now engaged in an imperial war. In fact, we are now fully reconnected to the imperial edifice from which almost accidentally we were dislodged back in the mid-80s. The reason we are there in Bamiyan, the reason our SAS personnel are engaged in Kabul, is part and parcel of rebuilding our friendship with the United States.
Right.
John Key has had the payoff for that with his half-hour audience with President Obama. Also, I think it's important to know that even during that period of dislodgement, the UK-USA agreement remained in force. And this is what Waihopai is all about.
That's right.
In the book I wrote, talked about the 5 fingers of the Anglo-Saxon fist, and we were the pinky finger, going AWOL, as it were, in the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, the pinky finger is well and truly back in the fist now. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And we have never stopped giving information to the United States and the United Kingdom, even when we were at daggers drawn with the Reagan administration back in the 80s. We still kept receiving and sending on the messages that the NSA were so keen to have, and obviously we are still doing that. The political and moral failure here is that this has been done in our name but without our knowledge. That's the real problem.
John, is our occupation of Afghanistan just?
No, I don't think it is. I think there was whatever one thinks about the merits legally and morally of the invasion. Once we were there, we certainly had an obligation to rebuild the country to the best of our ability, and the sad fact is that we lost the consent of the people. We lost the support of the Afghan people. We lost the battle for hearts and minds. It didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. And once that occurred, we basically were going downhill from there. And it's an immense tragedy what happened in Afghanistan. It's referred to often as the graveyard of empires. Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, amongst many others. Persian empires, Buddhist empires. Everyone's had a go, and yet the Afghans were traumatized and sick of war. They welcomed, in large part, the Americans and the foreign community when they went there, and looked to them with hope, looked to them with expectation that we would rebuild their shattered land. But we didn't go about it sensibly. We treated the local people with disdain and near contempt. We sucked up to the warlords that had helped us get in there. In many cases, we turned a blind eye to torture. In some cases, the West, not New Zealand, but the Western countries, United States, for example, actively were involved in breaches of international law and torturing and mistreating people. So, we lost people's respect, and rightly so, and we won't get it back. The situation is, to my way of thinking, lost, and the sooner we let Afghans decide their future, the better.
Chris, democracies are supposed to be a brake pedal to wars of choice. Are we seeing the socialisation of perpetual war?
Well, that is what the defence intellectuals in the United States are talking about, generational wars. And once again, I'd emphasise that this is always a feature of imperial powers. If you have an empire, there will always be parts of it where there is disturbance, where there may be rebellion, and your troops are never at ease. They are always going hither and yon to put out fires as and when they arise. And so, we have jumped on this wagon and we're rolling along with it.
A question to both of you. Finally, is it unfortunate that the new Governor General has been sworn in with the allegations of handing civilians over to known torch units hanging over his head? Is that unfortunate?
It's very unfortunate for him, and it's also very unfortunate for the New Zealand society at large, because I think no country wants to have as head of state a man who has these questions hanging over him. I think Sir Jerry Mataparai is not a bad man.
No. I think we all agree with that.
He's certainly no torturer. I doubt that he sits around using phrases like war on terror or axis of evil. But for better or for worse, he was the head of the Defence Force at a time when that Defence Force was very closely involved in the war on terror in Afghanistan.
Chris?
Well, you've got to go all the way back to Sir Bernard Ferguson. He was the last military man to be Governor General. He was also the last non-New Zealander to be a Governor General, and there was a good reason for that. Because although the public never learned this until very, very recently, Bernard Ferguson was part and parcel of the British occupation force in Palestine, and he was involved in a war crime.
Really?
And I think Keith Holyoake and the National Party at that time became aware of this, and I think they made it very clear to the palace and to the British authorities that A, they were having no more Brits, and they made a very solemn vow to themselves they were having no more soldiers. And John Key made a very serious error of judgment, in my view.
Let's wrap the show with last word. Chris, your last word this week is?
Oh, I just hope that Nikki's revelations, along with John's, I mean, we are so lucky to have these men in our country, the last of the real investigative journalists as far as I'm concerned. I just hope that New Zealanders understand the importance of the work they've done and take it and use it as good citizens in a democracy should. I hope that this does not become a 48-hour, 72-hour wonder and then simply slip away into the great maw of media, which, as you say, is probably more exercised about what goes on New Zealand's top model than it is what goes on in Bamiyan.
John, your final word this week?
Well, I'd echo those comments by Chris and say that one of the great losses to New Zealand in the War of Terror has been, one of the great failures has been the failure not just of the government and withholding information from the public, but the failure of journalists to ask the hard questions, to do the sort of investigative journalism Nikki's done, people like David Beatson have done, ask the hard questions, keep probing, not taking the word of a government, particularly in a time of war. And I really urge New Zealanders to go out, spend the money to buy that book. It's called Other People's Wars by Nikki Hager, released yesterday. It's a superb book. It's carefully documented, carefully footnoted by a man who's probably, without any real dispute, New Zealand's best investigative journalist. If you care about, the social fabric of New Zealand, if you care about what's right, and if you care about, learning what your country's been up to, secret war that we've been involved in, go out, find that book, Other People's War, buy it, and enjoy it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, John. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, it is an obscenity to our egalitarian history that 210,000 New Zealand children live in poverty, while the 150 of the richest families gain $7 billion in 1 year. I don't for one second believe military boot camps, Benny bashing 16 and 17-year-olds on welfare, or measures that in effect criminalise solo parenthood are solutions. They are merely manufactured chatter to divert attention from the crippling of the welfare state via privatisation. subcontracting the government's social obligations out to the private sector amounts to a dereliction of duty. This isn't government with a small g, this is government with a microscopic G. If the mainstream media are over-reporting on Happy Bowell's latest bowel movement, could it start asking some hard questions of the Prime Minister? If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thank you for watching whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.